Chapter 5 The Girl in Blue. While my sister and I were settling into our new lives in Washington, my dad's presidency hit the ground running. His administration was barely 5 months old, and yet it was already being defined by a foreign policy triumph. For several decades beforehand, there was a conflict between the Soviet Union and Japan. I've already discussed the USSR in an earlier chapter, so now let's focus on the other party. Japan is an archipelago of approximately 6,500 islands in the western reaches of the Pacific Ocean. These islands range in size from 4 huge land masses to many thousands of insignificant rocks. During my youth, about 100 million people called this place their home. In the present day, there are about 50 million humans and some 10 million non-humans living in Japan. As for the conflict, about 50 years before I was born, there was a war between the Soviet Union and Japan. It happened right as the Japanese Empire was being defeated and dismantled by its enemies. Because the Japanese military committed a long list of atrocities during the war, very little mercy was shown. When the smoke cleared, the Soviet Red Army occupied some of the northernmost islands of the Japanese archipelago and refused to withdraw from them. Over the next half-century, Japan and Russia continued to argue about who was the rightful owner of these islands. Their location in the Pacific Ocean was quite crucial, after all. A naval force stationed there could either guarantee or deprive Russia's ability to access the northern Pacific. By the time my dad was running for president, the United States and Japan had become quite friendly with one another, creating a serious problem for Russia. The two nations were as different as possible. American and Japanese people spoke different languages, wore different clothes, ate different foods, as well as having different cultures, religions, and values. But at the end of the day, the two nations shared a common enemy, the Soviet Union. The US and USSR were superpowers, competing for global dominance, and Japan's rapidly expanding economic power was making them into a serious contender once more. In Europe, a continent to America's east, the Soviet Union was dealt a terrible blow about 10 years before my dad entered the White House. Several countries who were once Russia's allies went through a series of revolutions. Russia's sphere of influence shrank as once loyal allies abandoned the Russian-led Warsaw Pact, seeking closer ties to NATO, an alliance led by the United States. Then, my dad took things further. With Congress's permission, my dad signed a treaty that created a formal alliance between the United States and Japan. Now, our two nations would stand united against any future power play by the Soviets. Of course, I was too young to understand any of this at the time. The only indication I got that something was going on was when my mom came into my bedroom one morning carrying a formal suit, tailored specifically for preteen boys. This is the very last thing most kids want to see. May 6th, 2005. Sidwell Friends School, District of Columbia. "Don't look now, Blake," Jackie said. "Andy's dad looks like the devil is after him." Our classmate looked really flustered as his father outpaced him, coming our way at a fast clip. Pete Guerra waved his arm to a nearby white van and a camera crew got out. The letters CNN were plastered in red across their equipment. "Walsh!" I called out. Agent Walsh arrived in a swish of red hair. She threw out her arms to shield Jackie and I from the news team as we started to make the mad dash from the presidential limo to the school entrance. Pete Guerra aimed his microphone underneath Walsh's armpit and signaled his team. "Go in 3, 2. Blake and Jacqueline Robinson, Pete Guerra from CNN News. Do you have a minute?" "We're late to class," I lied and started tugging my little sister by the arm to make her move. "Call me Jackie," my sister insisted. Taking whatever he could get, Pete carried on. "Sources say the Japanese delegation coming to the White House will be bringing children with them. How do you feel about meeting kids your own age from a foreign country? Will you speak with them? Have you been taking Japanese lessons?" Ignoring Pete as best we could, Jackie and I raced across the lawn and reached the school. Chelsea Daniels was waiting for us at the top of the stairs and did me the honor of slamming the door in Pete's face. Through a window, the three of us watched as an irate Agent Walsh ushered the news team away from the school, berating them with the usual arsenal of Irish curse words we were starting to learn from her. "Gobshite," Jackie repeated under her breath. "Like the way that sounds." "What the actual heck was that all about?" Chelsea asked. The answer came from Andy Guerra, who, having just escaped his father's orbit, raced to join us. "State dinner!" Andy gasped. "There's going to be a state dinner at the White House next week. A whole load of important people are going to be there." "I know, it's going to be so much fun," Jackie squealed. I folded my arms and sulked. "What's wrong with you?" Chelsea said, raising her eyebrows at me. "Let's think," I said. "I have to wear a stuffy suit, eat weird grown-up food, and listen to people talk in political gibberish in some other language for 3 hours. What do you think is wrong?" "But Mom said she'd help me find a new dress to wear that'll match hers." Jackie was bouncing with excitement. "And that I'd get to help her be the hostess." Andy gave her a playful punch on the shoulder. "Next First Lady of the United States right here, everyone." "Uh-huh. Yeah, she can do that," I said. "If I can get away with it, I'll just hide in my room with the TV on. I don't do parties." Chelsea put her hands behind her back and shot me a puppy dog eyes kind of expression. "You know, maybe the party'll be more fun if, I don't know, you take someone with you. A +1, maybe?" "No, definitely not going." May 7th, 2005. The White House, District of Columbia. My parents had something to say about that. My mom insisted, point blank, that the entire First Family needed to act as gracious hosts whenever the White House accommodated guests from foreign countries. "And you'll wear the suit," Mom finished. "There will be no whining." "These guests will be our new friends," my dad said. "We must make them feel welcome in our home. If you travel to Tokyo, wouldn't you expect them to do the same for you?" Grumbling, I admitted that I would. Most of the week leading up to the state dinner was spent in one form of preparation or another. My mom and the chief usher seemed determined to give the interior of the White House a complete facelift to make our guests more welcome. Decorations were changed and moved about. Throughout the building, several paintings and pictures were suddenly removed, covered up, hidden, or otherwise made to disappear, such as a large portrait of Harry S. Truman, a photograph of the U.S. Marines raising the American flag on a hilltop, and a painting of a bomber plane with the words "Enola Gay" on its nose. I asked why the pictures were being taken down, and the chief usher replied, "It's a long and tragic story. Unless your teachers in history have covered it already, I shan't bother you with it." Well, I found the answer so unhelpful that I went to the Chief of Staff's office and asked to borrow his laptop computer to do some research. I lost an entire day reading about the Pacific War, a time when the United States and Japanese Empire fought each other in a conflict that devastated Asia and the Pacific. I learned more about the subject that afternoon from any of my teachers ever could have taught me. The rest of D.C. was getting ready for the occasion, too. Like the White House, decorations of red and white were being hung from street lamps and big banners were hung from buildings. I can't remember what some of them said because their messages were written in Japanese. I do remember being taken aback the first time I saw the Japanese flag. A group of old men were attending some kind of ceremony at the World War II Memorial on the National Mall. I asked my dad what was going on, and he told me that several veterans of the Pacific War had gathered for a reunion. Former American soldiers and former Japanese soldiers, all of whom were now old men, were gathered together at the memorial, trading stories about their experiences. At the memorial itself, there were 2 flagpoles, each flying an American flag. A U.S. government official took down the flag furthest away from the White House and ran up the red and white Japanese flag in its place, flying it at a much lower height than our own Star and Stripe banner. The event ended when someone produced a blood-red flag of the Soviet Union, and the war veterans, Americans and Japanese alike, cheered and clapped as the Soviet flag was burned and reduced to ashes. My dad and I watched all this happen from a top-floor window in the White House. I remember the president shaking his head and sighing. I was hoping this alliance would prevent a war, but those folks down there are acting like they're itching for the next fight. May 8th, 2005. They weren't the only ones. The next day, the ambassador of the Soviet Union showed up at the White House, and he was furious. I could hear the shouting in the Oval Office all the way in the main building. Jackie and I tried to pay attention to the TV show we were watching, but the cacophony from the West Wing was overpowering. Finally, there was the smallest of thuds, which was followed by unexpected silence from Dad's office. About 2 minutes later, Jackie and I saw the Soviet ambassador being escorted out of the south entrance by two perplexed-looking Secret Service agents. Why were the agents so confused? Because the Soviet ambassador was missing his left shoe. Our curiosity piqued. Jackie and I abandoned our TV time to go looking for the suddenly fascinating yet vanished shoe. We didn't have to do that much searching, though. We simply followed the sound of laughter through the halls and into the West Wing, where we found ourselves in the Oval Office. There were 6 people. My dad, the Vice President, 2 members of the U.S. Senate, a member of the Cabinet, and a U.S. Army general. They were all laughing as though the funniest joke in history had just been uttered. "You have got to be kidding me!" Senator John McCain looked like he was about to fall over. "He really threw his shoe." "He did." Vice President McDonald laughed so hard he choked. Senator Debbie Stabenow was laughing so hard she had to sit down on one of the couches in front of the Resolute desk. She spotted Jackie and I in the doorway, and she waved us in. "Kids," she said, "you gotta see this to believe it." Senator Stabenow pointed towards a window just behind the back of my dad's chair. We moved along the big Resolute desk and saw what was amusing everyone. The window pane was cracked and now bore a resemblance to a spider's web. A lone shoe rested on the floor, its laces tangled up as though it had just gone skydiving. General Alexis Alexander, a middle-aged woman with strawberry blonde hair, picked up the shoe and held it away from her as though she expected it to explode. "What should we do with this thing?" the general asked. The Secretary of War, Donald Rumsfeld, shook his head and laughed. "Isn't it obvious?" Rumsfeld chuckled. "Call the bomb squad. Have them drop it down a sewer and blow it to Kingdom Come." "Oh, come on now." My dad implored everyone in the room to calm down. "I'm sure Mr. Ushakov is going to want that back, and he'll have it." "Certainly," Vice President McDonald said. "I'll just call up the chief usher and—" "Wait a moment." He'd seen the mischievous grin on my dad's face. The president held up his hand and declared, "Ambassador Ushakov can have his shoe back at the end of my administration." Then he picked up the phone and called his chief of staff. "Lane, get someone to bring a glass box in here. I've got something new for the trophy case." Then he looked at Jackie and I. "Hey, kids, the ambassador's shoe smells really bad. Run to the bowling alley downstairs. Get the most powerful deodorant you can find." "You mean that spray can the really huge Secret Service guy uses?" Jackie asked. "Yep, that's the one. There should be a cigarette lighter next to it. Bring that too." "Yeah," my sister and I said together. Then we both took off. It wasn't often Dad explicitly allowed Jackie and I to get up to some mischief, but on those rare occasions it did happen, we were never disappointed. As we vanished down the hallway, I heard my dad saying, "Now hold on, Senator. I never said I was going to perfectly preserve the damn thing, did I? And he did throw it at my head. He can have whatever's left." May 13th, 2005. Whatever joy I was going through that week evaporated on the night of the state dinner. Back in the days when I was a kid, I was somewhat superstitious. I knew to avoid stepping on sidewalk cracks, lest I break my mom's back. I steered clear of black cats as best I could, and treated mirrors as though they were made of the most fragile glass on earth. But I was downright terrified of going to the state dinner because it was going to start at 6 o'clock in the evening on Friday the 13th. I'm aware that Earth's calendar doesn't see much use outside of the Orion Arm, so I'll include this explanation for my non-human readers. On our world, if the final day of the work week is also the 13th day of the month, all bad luck is multiplied tenfold. I went into that dinner expecting nothing short of an unqualified disaster to take place, so I kept my expectations for the evening low. If there's one place on Earth a 12-year-old boy doesn't belong, it's a black tie-required dinner party. Jackie was having a blast by comparison. She'd fallen in love with the dress Mom bought for her, and now Jackie was shadowing Mom as she carried out her duties, becoming a mini First Lady. When we showed up to the state dining room, the guests were already there. About 200 people, all told. Half were Americans and half were guests from Japan. Official records from the day confirmed that the Japanese Prime Minister, some members of his cabinet, several members of the Japanese National Diet, and countless prominent business people from their country were in attendance. Also attending the meeting were the elderly Princess Chihiro, wife of the, by then deceased, brother of the Emperor of Japan. She'd brought along her entire family, her son, Prince Ryobe, his wife Tokiko, and their children, the princesses Akeno and Asami, and their son, Prince Akio. It was the youngest of these children, Princess Asami, who saved my evening from becoming the disaster I feared so much. Perhaps I'm favoring her a little too much here, but I think it should be allowed. After all, I would go on to marry that girl, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Sometime after all of the speeches were done and the meals were served, Princess Akeno and her family came to the high table to greet my dad and our family. That was how I got my first good look at Princess Asami. To say she had, and still does have, a unique appearance is nothing short of an undersell. As I said before, there were about 200 people in the room, and everyone was wearing roughly the same unremarkable outfits. Formal suits and dresses that ranged in color from gray to brown and black. Everyone was uniform. Everyone was forgettable. Everyone was boring. Then here was the girl in blue. And I do mean it. Most human children will go through a phase when they would live and die by their favorite color. And at the time, Princess Asami was smack in the middle of hers. Every article of clothing she wore was some shade or variation of the color blue. She wore a knee-length sleeveless dress embroidered with a wave-like pattern, as though she'd chosen to wear the ocean itself to dinner. The ribbon, keeping her straight black hair in a neat braid, looked as though a large blue butterfly was calmly perched atop her head. And all of this served to draw my eyes to her face. And hers is one I will never forget. As if Princess Asami didn't already stand out in a crowd, the contrasting colors of her face will always make her unique to me. Pale skin, black hair and eyebrows, and eyes as blue as sapphires. I've never met a human being whose natural eye color has ever come close to matching hers. Over the past 60 years of our relationship, my wife and I have constantly joked to one another that we wish our very first conversation was about something different. Everyone wishes that the first words they said to their true love would be somehow profound or meaningful. But we've come to accept and live with the fact that our first ever chat was about food. As the family of royals gave their gifts to the presidential family, Princess Asami offered a handful of Japanese candy to Jackie and me. Our mom snatched the sweets away and said, "Finish your dinner first." "But, Mom," I protested, "I don't even know what this stuff is." In some show of multicultural unity, all of the Americans had been served Japanese food during the state dinner. Clearly, the White House chef did not have kids of his own, otherwise he would have known that serving unknown mystery meals to children is not the best idea. Fortunately, Princess Asami spoke up in a helpful way. "Tonkatsu." While the rest of the family was having a good-natured laugh at my expense, Princess Asami was staring at my dish with barely hidden hunger. "Tonkatsu," she said again. "It's pork." Well, that changed my opinion about this foreign mystery meal in an instant. I like pork. Asami sidestepped a little so I could see the table where her family had been sitting. She pointed to a chair and dinner setting that had its back to the high table. "And what's that American stuff on my plate?" Asami added. "That's a crab cake." "Do you like crab cake?" Asami butchered the pronunciation without meaning to. "Sure. Wanna trade?" "Deal." Asami's parents were so busy chattering with my dad that they didn't notice the exchange until it was far too late. The youngest princess had already returned to her family's side, and I was happily wolfing down the finest crab cake the state of Maryland can produce. Mom and Dad were definitely paying attention to Jackie and I during our first meeting with Asami and her siblings. Once the two of us finished our meals, the First Lady finally gave us a stay of execution. "Blake and Jacqueline, why don't you be good hosts and take the Japanese kids on a tour of the White House?" We were so happy to get out of that stuffy dining room. So were the other kids. Jackie and I met the other kids in the red room, right next door to the state dining room. Asami, Akio, and their older sister Akeno all looked just as relieved to get away from the party. "I just want to take off my shoes and lie down," Princess Akano sighed. "Does anyone know what time it is in Tokyo right now?" "If I told you, you'd start feeling sleepy," Jackie teased. "Hey, did you guys know the White House has a bowling alley?" Jackie and I escorted our guests to the bowling alley downstairs. Before we got there, something strange happened. A fourth person joined us. At the time, none of us ever learned this individual's name, and we never saw them again after that. It would be easy, and quite excusable, for me to completely forget this stranger and neglect to mention them now. In fact, when I spoke to my wife about this particular moment in our lives, she had no recollection whatsoever about meeting another kid on our way to the bowling alley. Thanks to Igarashi, this stranger's identity can finally be revealed. Among the many declassified government papers Igarashi showed me was a full report on the recovery of the JSDF Archangel. Akira Robinson's time ship was found and confiscated by UN military forces in the ruins of Jilin, China on July 14, 2035, mere days before the battle for Earth. Several months later, in February of 2036, Secretary General Laura Harper ordered the vehicle to be dismantled for parts. The ship chassis was saved, and eventually a second Archangel was built, the one my family still possesses to this very day. However, the computer core of the original Archangel was preserved intact. During the Second Hyperspace War, Akira said to myself and others that she anticipated her ship would be destroyed by other actions long before UN forces were able to salvage it. When her prediction did not come to pass, Akira violently attacked the UN army units who were attempting to recover the Archangel wreck. At first, we quite naturally believed she was attempting to stop the UN from seizing the Time Core, a device that allowed Akira's ship to travel across time as easily as one crosses a road. However, the decryption of the ship's computer core reveals a second possible motive. The central computer of Akira's time ship contained an incomplete but nonetheless authoritative list of all disguises, aliases, and false identities used by Akira Robinson throughout her time travel adventures. Thanks to the Byzantine bureaucracy of the UN Secretariat, this crucial document was hidden beneath a mountain of paperwork for almost half a century until Igarashi recovered it, and my daughter's friend Chris applied his vast knowledge of the paradox to it. Not only does this list contain the many names Akira used for herself, it also featured a description of each disguise, the persona attached with it, a description of its use in the timeline, and a comment on the disguise's usability. Akira seems to have edited the list in roughly real time as she went along, perhaps to keep the varying identities straight in her own mind. To give some sense of what I found, here is just a small sample of the list of Akira's false identities in her own writing. Jade Paktu, Kushan Exile, Kith Paktu, used for influencing Aryak Soban Ray. Success. Aryak established romantic connection to San Sejet Sa, August 1923. Death staged at Karakan Genocide. Alias unusable beyond 1923. Tito Hara no Pera, Partogan military recruit, for preventing death of Mami Tamihana, Queen of Partoga, 1928 to... How long is this woman gonna live? Detected, unmasked by Lavakians, 1928. Original body discovered. Death confirmed, unusable beyond 1928. Still successful. Hinakiri Aranui, Partogan news reporter, for flipping 1928 Partogan royal election. Success. Made a mistake while talking to Mommy. Used wrong name for sister. Mommy didn't notice. Disguise held. Successful exfiltration. Alias retired. Nia Riri Nui. Partogan acolyte. Used for opossum maneuver. Success. Alraki, 1928. As best my friends and I can tell, the opossum maneuver mentioned is the strategy Akira employs to fake her own death, something she seems to have done many times. Once my companion showed me this list, I immediately thought back to that strange, dark-haired girl who joined us that night in the White House bowling alley. It was already turning into a special night for me even then. Jackie, Akeno, Akio, Asami, and I were all having a great time in the bowling alley. We knocked down pins, threw gutter balls, and shared stories about life in our respective homes. At one point, the conversation turned to the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. My sister wasn't interested in talking about ghosts that day, and she tried to shut down the conversation right away. I remember feeling really hurt. It's painful, emotionally, to see that nobody believes you. Jackie, Akeno, and Akio all backed away from me when I started talking about the ghost. I was convinced that it was my fault that they didn't believe, that I'd somehow failed to convince them or something. It was so uplifting when I realized that Asami was still by my side, and I felt my resolve come back a little when she said, "You said you heard him up on the second floor, right?" Asami's voice caught me by surprise. She was clearly still interested in what I was saying about the Lincoln Room's ghost. "Wait a second," I said slowly. "Do you believe me?" Asami nodded. "Yeah, I believe you. Do you believe you?" "No," Jackie moaned. "Don't encourage him." Asami was starting to get animated. Excitedly, she was bouncing up and down on the balls of her feet. "Let's go up to the Lincoln bedroom," she said. "Maybe the ghost is there right now. We could catch him like those guys on TV do." "That's cool and all," I said, then added, "There's one big problem." I gestured my thumb to the hallway door and said as loudly as I could, "Hey, Jackie, let's go outside and talk to strangers." Almost immediately, an all too familiar voice came through the door. "Robinson! Fisht fill ya, ya gobshite! You're staying in, and I better not hear to give it out." Jackie and Akeno giggled. Akio looked shocked. The fourth kid raised her eyebrow. Asami's eyes went wide. "That," I explained, is Secret Service agent Kathleen Walsh. She's been following us since we left the dining room. Jackie and I have been putting up with her since we moved into this place. This had the opposite effect of what I was expecting. If anything, Asami was now looking even more adventurous. The threat of being caught breaking the rules seemed to give her a thrill. How are we going to get past her? Asami squeaked. Asami's enthusiasm was giving me new energy, and a plan was coming together in my mind. Okay, I said in a hushed voice. I think I've got a plan to get past Walsh, but we're going to need a can of soda, a cell phone, Jackie's hairband, and 2 of those bowling pins. The mysterious dark-haired girl shook her head and told us, Cool your jets, Robinson. It'll be easier if I just take one for the team. We don't even know you, Jackie whispered. The strange girl stepped over to the shelf full of bowling shoes and withdrew a black hoodie from behind the counter. She slipped it on, then put her hands in her pockets and slouched forward a bit. She looked like a genuine hooligan. Then she gave us all one mischievous smile, then stepped out into the hallway. There was about 10 seconds of silence in which the 5 of us just stared at each other, shocked, and then there was a loud crash. Something expensive had just gotten broken. Secret Service agent Walsh shrieked, Hey, you feckin' idiot! Get back here! 2 sets of footsteps thundered down the hall, the stranger giggling up a storm as she fled from Agent Walsh. For my entire adult life, I did not know who that person was. But now, thanks to the database recovered from the time ship Archangel, I am fully confident this was Akira Robinson herself. The Paradox was pretending to be the granddaughter of the Japanese Prime Minister. At no point in human history did Junichiro Koizumi have a granddaughter. Princess Asami and I went to the bedroom alone. We spent half an hour trying to flush out the ghost and see it for ourselves. At one point, I explained the significance of this room to her in greater detail. See that desk? I said, pointing into a corner. That's where Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. What was that? She asked. A decree that freed the slaves, I said. It changed everything about the Civil War. Huh. Asami sounded thoughtful. You know, my country had its own civil war in the past. Actually, we had 2. Those fights were, really important to our culture. Which means... She stood in the center of the room and looked around herself. I remember thinking she looked like a character in a Disney movie who was trying to find some hidden magic. You said you never actually saw him, right? Yeah, just noises, I replied. And you said this desk is where he freed slaves? Kinda? I wasn't sure how to answer. He signed a paper that allowed his armies to free slaves, if that's what you mean. Asami's face contorted, as though she was struck by a sudden thought. This whole time, she had been casually resting one of her hands on Lincoln's desk. She suddenly withdrew it, as though the wood was now burning hot. What? I said. What's wrong? I think it's a shintai, Asami whispered. Wait. A what? Asami put her fingers to her temples. She was struggling to figure out the right words to describe the idea in her head. It's like... You know how spirits don't just hang around in the open? She spoke slowly, as though double-checking the Japanese to English conversion in her head. They need a body, a container, to be inside of. Okay, I urged her to go on. Lots of things can be shintai, Asami said. Normally it's stuff like mirrors or gohei or magatama. But maybe this room... I'll be brutally honest. Asami just about lost me at this point. I assumed she was referencing something from Shinto, the dominant religion of Japan. In fact, many years later, she confirmed for me that this assumption was correct. She was trying to explain Japanese spirits to me. Lost in her own train of thought, Asami kicked off her shoes and got down on her knees, facing Lincoln's bed. She clasped her hands in front of her like she was praying and started talking to the bed in a slow mumble. Asami did this for about half a minute before she looked up at me. She must have read the confused look on my face because all the color drained out of her cheeks as her expression grew very uncomfortable. "You think I look silly, don't you?" Asami said as I watched her. "You don't believe me at all." She looked like she was going to cry. Over half a century later, I could still remember, as clear as yesterday, the exact thought that went through my mind. She believed me earlier. If I don't show her the same kindness in return, I'll be a horrible person, and she'll probably cry. It was a split-second decision to get down on my knees next to her and say, "I believe you. Honest." I don't know how long we spent doing Shinto prayers, but that's what we were doing when Agent Walsh came in and caught us. We were kneeling on the floor of the Lincoln bedroom together, talking out loud to the president's bed, asking his spirit to show itself. In hindsight, decades later, the two of us agree that we must have looked really weird. Sure, we both got in trouble for our little escapade. My parents chewed me out something fierce the next day. I was irresponsible and reckless for something like that. Asami got it pretty bad from her folks too. But, you know, getting in trouble is, without a doubt in my mind, the fastest and most effective way for two children to bond. Asami and I became friends that night. We actually held hands during that long walk of shame as Agent Walsh took us back to our families. Before she flew back to Japan, Asami managed to sneak her phone number and email address into my hand. But there is one other detail, one thing that was always important to us. Ever since that day, the words, "I believe you," have meant more to us than the words, "I love you."